I live 6,000 kilometers, 3,800 miles away from New York City, but I'm gonna try and make New York pizza in my home kitchen. Let's go. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Matt. I'm a self-taught home cook. In this series, we are trying to make the perfect slice of pizza in our home kitchen. No fancy equipment, just what I have in my home kitchen. If you haven't been following so far, we started off making a 4-ingredient pizza dough that turned out pretty good, and we've made a couple of Italian-style pizzas, trying to up our game with 00 flour and then adding a pizza stone into the mix. Now we need to jump over the ocean and head to New York, which makes fantastic pizza based off of the Italian pizzas. There's a few things that are different. The crust is a little bit thicker, which actually is going to probably help us out a bit in our home kitchen pizza, because that's going to mean it's going to take a little longer in the oven, which means we don't need that insanely high temperature that the Italian pizzas get up to. But let's not spend too much time talking about it. Let's jump in the kitchen and let's make a New York slice of pizza. Our New York pizza is going to be basically a completely different method than the Neapolitan pizza that we've been making in the previous episodes. We are going to start with bread flour. Bread flour is not as finely milled as the 00 flour that we've been using in the previous episodes. So it's going to have a different texture. It's likely going to be a little bit chewier, a little bit denser, a little bit thicker than Neapolitan pizza that we've been making. The second thing that we're going to use is a food processor to mix the dough. Apparently this is going to create a fluffier dough, which is a little more like the New York style pizzas. One of my immersion blenders has this little attachment, and this just goes on top, and it creates basically a food processor. Hopefully this works, but let's give it a try. A little bit of salt, a little bit of sugar, and this time we're using dried yeast. It says on the side that I don't need to dissolve in water or anything like that. It can just go right into the dough. Pulse this a few times, make sure everything is distributed evenly in the bowl. Then I'm gonna add lukewarm water right in here, and then a little bit of extra virgin olive oil. Lid goes back on. Run the food processor for about 30 seconds or so, which is going to form this into a dough ball, hopefully. Looks like it's starting to come together into a dough. Let's take a look. I think that's sort of what we're looking for, so let's take this out and start kneading. Flour my work surface. I feel like I've said that a lot in this series. The dough out. It's sticking a fair bit. Try to get it off the blades. The blades are really sharp, so remember not to touch anything. I'm just gonna knead this a few times by hand. I'm gonna flour my hands. Let's give this a few turns. It's actually coming together into a smooth ball really, really quickly. So let's set this aside. As usual, I'm gonna lightly grease one of these bowls and put my dough right in here. Cover this tightly with plastic wrap. And this is going in the refrigerator 1 full day at minimum for this dough. So let's put it aside. All right, I have left my dough sitting overnight in the fridge. It's actually been almost 24 hours since the dough has started. I think it's fermentation, I think is what the first one's called. This is certainly the longest dough that we've made. So we've got a few things that we can do today. We need to make our pizza sauce. We need to finish making our dough. We still have to do the second rise, that warm temperature rise. Let's finish making our New York slice of pizza. Let's get our dough out of the fridge. We're gonna form it into a ball, and then we're gonna do our second room temperature rise that we've done in each of the last episodes. Get our dough out. And we're just gonna shape this into a ball, but basically just sort of push it towards the bottom, and then with your fingers, pinch it closed. Just gonna flour this lightly so it doesn't stick, not too much. And then just a little in the bowl, and the dough goes in. Covering with plastic wrap this aside for 2 hours. While the dough is rising, we can make our first cooked tomato sauce of this pizza series. Whole tomatoes. These are just regular grocery store tomatoes. We're not using the San Marzano tomatoes. I'm using whole tomatoes, so I'm gonna pass these through my food mill. You could use an immersion blender, a regular blender. I just like the texture I get from my food mill. Tomatoes go in. That's our tomatoes pureed. Let's set this aside. I'm gonna add about a tablespoon of butter and about a tablespoon of extra virgin olive oil. Melt these over medium-low heat. Once the butter's melted, I'm gonna add 2 garlic cloves that I have grated on a microplane grater, teaspoon of dried oregano, some red pepper flakes. The more of this you put in, the spicier it'll get, and some salt. Stir this around. Then after a few minutes, we're gonna add in our tomatoes, a few basil sprigs. Teaspoon of sugar helps balance out some of the tomato taste, or the acidity, I should say, in the tomatoes. And this is a great idea from Marcella Hazan, who makes one of the best tomato sauces I've ever had. An onion cut in half adds some sweetness to the sauce, similar to what we're doing with the sugar. We're trying to balance the sauce out. Plus, we can just pull these out after this is done cooking. This is coming to a simmer, so we're gonna lower our heat and cook this for about an hour. We want it to reduce by about half. So after about an hour of simmering, this has thickened a fair bit. You can see how thick this is. Take out the onions and our basil. We need this to cool down before we make our pizza. So we're gonna set this aside. Our dough has about half an hour left in its rise. So we have half an hour left to wait. This has finished its warm proof. Looks like it's about doubled in size. Start spreading it out from the center to form our pizza. Once it gets to a certain size, I can start putting my knuckles underneath and stretching it this way. This is the biggest pizza I've made. It's a New York pizza, so it should be bigger. Let's add some sauce. I'm gonna start in the center and just move it all around. As usual, leaving a bit of room for the crust. A bit of mozzarella cheese. So I think the most authentic way to make this is like this, but I've eaten a lot of just cheese pizzas, so I'm gonna add some pepperoni. Start in the center and fan my way out. And I'm gonna slide this onto my pizza stone, and it's gonna cook for probably about 12 or 14 minutes, a fair bit longer than our Neapolitan pizza. Let's see what happens. And this is our New York style pizza. You know, we've definitely got a much thicker crust than we had on our previous episodes. This looks pretty good. Had a little trouble getting it into the oven, so it got a little misshapen. Let's cut a slice. Give this a try. This is really, really good. The crust, you know, you can see how different it is. It's definitely a lot softer using that bread flour as opposed to the 00 flour. You know, we've got some good bubbles. You know, you can see over here, it's probably a little bit too thick, a little bit thicker than sort of a New York pizza, but I'm gonna have another bite. Very, very different than the first pizzas that we've made in this series. If you enjoyed this episode, hit the like button, really helps out the channel. Leave a comment if you've made pizza like this before and you have any tips. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. The dough was so big, but like I can still fold it. I think if I wanted to do that New York folding thing, it would have to be a lot thinner, but it's still delicious.